Chers auditeurs,
Dear listeners,
bonjour.
welcome in Comme d'Archi Podcast Season 3
Saison 3, dans le monde fascinant des architectes.
and in the architectural projects.
Je suis Anne-Charlotte Deponte, passionnée d'architecture et docteur des universités en histoire de l'archi.
I am one of the spokespersons of Anne Charlotte, who is a PhD in architecture history.
Merci
Thank you
d'être avec moi aujourd'hui.
to be with us today.
Et
And
maintenant,
now,
lundi en français, place au talent.
and Wednesday, let's talk projects. In English, of course.
Bienvenue dans Comme d'Archi.
Hello everyone, dear listeners. I am particularly happy to meet you again today for our Christmas format with the radiant subject, the splendid Sainte Chapelle in Paris. Last year, at this time, I deliberately chose a symbolically charged but non-religious historical subject, the Institut de France. This year, I hesitated to choose a church, and I did, even though it was a particular chapel, because I must admit I love churches that crystallized faith in life and transcend it. I love churches not as a bigot, but as a historian. Paradoxically, not as a specialist in so-called historical architecture, but as a checker of modernity. Because yes, I think that we have not invented anything, let alone reinvented anything. The essence is already there, and modernity in the Baudelairean sense of the term was there before. Today we are lulled into thinking about otherwise, about reinvention. I am happy to humbly share with you moments where we tirelessly learn to see, we gain in acuity to finally give ourselves the possibility to choose, in the movement of our lives, our way of housing. Before deciding what is good, beautiful or not, let us be surprised and let us try to understand the constructive fact together. Everything does not lie in a forest of trees around us, even if it is important, nor in the rediscovery of ancestral techniques, even if it is important, if we do not understand beforehand, in depth, what it is all about. For example, to understand the Sainte Chapelle is to apprehend the so-called Gothic architecture, where the essential beauty is translated by the light, in all its constructive complexity based on the pointed arch and the buttress. This is the Gothic style of the Île-de-France, related to the art of the court with a search for refinement and virtuosity. To understand La Sainte Chapelle is to know that this particularly famous work has been the subject of passionate discussions between archaeologists on the problem of its attribution, and above all to understand that if it has changed over time, it has managed to resist the folly of man, nestled like a jewel box in the precincts of the Palais de la Cité, which has now become the Palais de Justice in Paris. Let's start at the beginning. Until the middle of the 14th century, the Palais de la Cité was the usual residence of the kings of France. Saint Louis sometimes stayed there, sometimes in Vincennes. In 1237, he entered into negotiation with the Basileus, i.e. the Eastern Emperor, with a view to acquiring the holy relics of the Passion, the crown of thorns, a piece of the true cross, fragments of the lance, the purple cloak, the holy sponge, and the shroud. Bringing the divine closer to the king obviously meant sublimating his power. The appearance of the monumental reliquary that is the Sainte Chapelle, its dimensions are in fact more important than it appears, which contributes to giving the image of a work of goldsmithery. This tendency was very much in keeping with the spirit of the art of the time. The facades of the transept of the Notre-Dame de Paris have also been compared to metal works. There was no reason to postpone the start of work on the Holy Chapel beyond 1241. A papal bull of 1244 granted the creation of a college of canons. In 1246, a service of guardians was organized, and the solemn dedication took place on 26 April 1248. A rapid construction of 7 years, far from the temporality of the great cathedral building sites. The environment of the building has been greatly modified since the Middle Ages. The small two-story building that served as the sacristy and treasury and that flanked the monument to the north disappeared in the 18th century. To the west, the porch was connected at its upper level to a gallery leading on the same level to the palace to the north. Under Louis XI, a large staircase was built to the south, allowing direct access to the upper porch. This staircase has now disappeared. The spire has been rebuilt several times, and in the 19th century the building underwent an overall restoration which, although extensive, was no less scrupulous. It is true that a third of the windows are modern, but the imitation has been sufficiently careful that this insertion does not shock. However, it is regrettable that little attention was paid to the painting of the lower chapel. This two-story Sainte Chapelle, following the tradition of the Palatine chapels, is also commonly attributed to Pierre de Montreuil, but no text confirms this tradition. Traditional historiography has attributed many works to Pierre de Montreuil. Archaeological analysis proves that they are too dissimilar to come from the hands and thoughts of a single man. A few decades ago, Robert Branner proposed, on the basis of strong arguments, to attribute the Sainte Chapelle to Thomas de Cormont, who worked on Amiens Cathedral, while Dieter Kempel and Robert Surcail referred to his predecessor, Robert de Luzarches. Apart from the magnificence of the stained glass window, which, apart from the rose window of the Apocalypse, depicts 1,113 scenes from the life of man, let us concentrate on the architecture itself. The Sainte Chapelle is designed on two levels. An aerial superstructure is built on a massive base, which gives the impression that all wall material has been removed. At least, that is the impression one gets inside the building. But it is an illusion, since the upper chapel is supported by large buttresses. Viollet-le-Duc would have criticized these buttresses, although, on the contrary, they contribute to the monumentality of the work. The western facade has been extensively restored, particularly in its lower part. The accesses to the upper chapel have disappeared, and to reach it one must now take the two spiral staircases that were originally intended for the service. Above the porch terrace, a rose adorns the wall. On the outside, the lower chapel has three large recesses in the masonry and short broken arches where the windows are inserted. Inside, everything shows great refinement, everything is painted and sculpted, nothing is large, everything is fragmented. In plan and in volume, this low chapel is divided into three vessels. Technical reasons impose this division. Covering such a wide space with a single vault would have been impossible, the height being given by that of the palace gallery. A single vessel would have forced the vaults to start from the ground. The central nave is thus covered with flat vaults that fall on short columns. It is surrounded by narrow aisles that are linked by a sort of ambulatory. The vaults of these corridors are raised. At the right of each pier, some sort of braces in the form of half arches have been mounted. The vaults are therefore of a different structure. These lateral arches play the role of real internal buttresses for the vaults in the center, which the architect has transformed into decorative elements. The system thus created also ensures that the upper chapel is well supported. The outer walls appear fragile. The windows in the interior seem to be set flush with the wall, yet they are no less than 1.5 meters thick. It is especially in the upper chapel that one gets the impression that the material has given way to the stained glass. The building is reduced to a structure made of thick buttresses stiffened by arches surmounted by gables and thrown out to the outside. This brings the structure closer to that of the radiating chapels of Amiens. We find the same type of buttresses without vertical recesses, and the windows of the apse have in both cases two lancets surmounted by three trilobes. But the windows of the right-hand base are to be compared with those of the chapels of Notre-Dame de Paris. These windows of the Sainte Chapelle are perfect in the sense previously defined. The Sainte Chapelle is therefore a huge glass cage. However, the inner pillars, consisting of 9 columns, protrude by a meter. Such an airy construction posed problems for its builder. The mullions, like the jambs of your windows, except that they are made of stone, are 12 meters high and only 25 centimeters thick. To enable them to withstand the wind, solid iron bars were incorporated into the construction. The construction itself was made of very standardized elements. The chapel consists of 4 long bays ending in an apse with 8 ribs radiating out from an offset keystone. The vaults in this part are lower than in the nave and the windows are also slightly shorter. But these differences are hardly noticeable, as the architect has managed to ensure that the windows in the right-hand bays and those in the apse cannot be seen at a glance, as a large double leaf separates the former from the latter. The flatness of the elevation is reinforced by the presence of the base, which is deliberately highlighted here. It is, however, decorated with a blind arcature composed of 6 arcades per bay grouped 2 by 2. The decoration throughout the building is astonishingly rich. There are capitals with hooks and others where the flora is copied from nature. All of this was painted, but the restitution that has been proposed to us does not allow us to have an idea of what it was originally. It should also be added that statues of apostles were hung on the piers. The theme of the apostolic procession hanging on the supports will be widely taken up later. At the time, this monument contributed to a new aesthetic than that of the beginning of the century. Everything was subordinated to the beauty of the design. The material and the volume disappeared in favor of the surface. This was the case on the outside, but especially on the inside. Such an aesthetic was perfectly in tune with the philosophical speculations of the time. It can be found in other artistic productions. The curves of the windows, the arcades of the bays, the very designs of the pavement, the chases exhibited on the altars, take up the same elegance of the line, of the curve. Unity triumphs. Each element is a secondary unit of the whole. How did this aesthetic spread to the rest of the kingdom? Certainly, some regions might have seemed less than conducive to such an aesthetic. In other respects, they were. This was the case of Normandy, which was favorable to the taste for linearity represented by the play of multiple columns. A final question. The taste for the circle expressed did not lend itself to an infinite variation. Was there not a risk of art falling into academicism? The Sainte Chapelle seems to crystallize an elaborate Gothic style, and this in a form that is still pure. It has finally resisted the ravages of time to reach us, although transformed and deprived of its relics since the Revolution. The historical protection provided since the 19th century has played its role well. Let's learn from this today, when people are ready to overturn all the safeguards as long as they can erect their little ego. I say beware. Let's remain humble in front of so much constructive perennity and influence. Let's stop applying our delusions, which I will be tempted to describe as schizophrenic acculturation, to the most accomplished works of architecture, particularly medieval architecture, which has in large part founded our civilization. It is not because one respects one's heritage that one is not capable of creating and moving forward in an agile manner capable of shaping the present time. Dear faithful listeners, I hope that this reading of the Sainte Chapelle has been of some benefit to you. You are the darlings of Comme d'Archi, which without you would have no interest, so don't hesitate to leave us your comments. I must inform you that the time has come for the monetization of Comme d'Archi, as I am not a rich heiress. Since 2017, I have been producing this podcast with my team and with great passion, in very tight flow and elbow grease. As the saying goes, he who wants to travel far spares his mount, and a few commercials will make the production of Comme d'Archi a little more comfortable. For our team, I hope you will understand. Also, for those who listen to us on YouTube, try to switch to the free listening platforms Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, etc. I wish you all a Merry Christmas and all my best wishes for the year 2022. See you next year from next Monday, 3rd January, with the interview of a philosophical voice dedicated to architecture that I wanted to collect. Until then, take care of yourselves. Goodbye, see you next year.
Thank you for listening. Thanks to Julien Rebours, sound engineer, who is collaborating with us today. Don't forget to tune in to our previews on Instagram at Comme d'Archi Podcast. If you enjoy this podcast, don't hesitate to promote it by giving it 5 stars and a little comment on Apple Podcast or on your favorite podcast platform. And above all, subscribe to listen to all of our episodes for free. See you soon, and until then, take care of yourself.